A year ago, I started a business that I never thought would take off. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't based on some wild, innovative idea. In fact, I felt a bit foolish at first, but here I am, a year later, running a successful small company that's on track to hit 6 figures in revenue this year. And it all started with something as simple as cleaning people's houses. Let me rewind. My name is Ethan, and like many people, I was stuck in a dead-end job. I worked as an account manager for a mid-sized company, the kind where you feel like you've got a decent paycheck, but you're not going anywhere. Every morning, I sat in traffic for over an hour, got to the office, and spent my day juggling emails and clients that never really seemed to appreciate my efforts. I wasn't happy. In fact, I was miserable, but I told myself this was just how adult life worked. You suck it up, and you get by. But then something shifted. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't like some epiphany. It started small, just a thought that kept creeping in. Why am I doing this? I've been watching other entrepreneurs online, reading success stories, and wondering how they got to where they were. One of them said, "The only difference between you and the successful people is that they decided to act." At that moment, I made a decision. I was going to try something. Something small. Something that could get me out of the rut, without risking everything. I've always been a bit of a neat freak. Cleaning is something I enjoy. Yes, weird, I know. It's a task that I find oddly calming, and I've always been the one to do it when friends or family needed help. One afternoon, as I was cleaning my place, I thought, why not? Why not turn this into a business? I had zero experience in cleaning professionally, but I knew I could figure it out. I started doing some research. How much do house cleaners charge? How do they get clients? What are the legal requirements? Over the next few weeks, I spent my evenings diving into the logistics. I was also still working my 9-to-5 job, so time was tight. But every night, I'd stay up late figuring out how I could turn this idea into a real thing. The first hurdle was figuring out how to price the service. I knew I couldn't charge too much, as I was just starting out and didn't have any real experience to justify high rates. So I started with an entry-level price. Not rock bottom, but affordable enough that it would get people to give me a shot. Next, I created a simple website and a Facebook page. I had zero web design skills, so I used a basic template and learned as I went. I posted ads on local groups offering my cleaning services at a discount for first-time customers. The first couple of weeks were slow. I was nervous. I kept wondering if I was just wasting my time. But then, something unexpected happened. I got my first client. It was a small job, a 2-bedroom apartment that needed a deep clean. I was excited, but also terrified. I showed up with all the cleaning supplies I had bought, which, to be honest, were nothing fancy. The first job was harder than I thought. I learned quickly that cleaning someone else's house is very different from doing your own. But the client was kind and gave me helpful feedback. By the end of the job, she seemed impressed. And just like that, I had a new customer. Not just that, but she also referred me to a friend who needed cleaning done. Over the next month, I slowly built a small client base. I started working weekends and evenings. The first few jobs were always a struggle, and I was working for peanuts. But every time I finished a job, I gained more confidence. I started figuring out what supplies worked best, how long each type of job would take, and what I could do to speed up the process without sacrificing quality. After 2 months of working on weekends and late nights, I decided to take a leap. I left my full-time job. I didn't have enough to replace my salary completely, but I had enough savings to last me for a couple of months. I figured that if I didn't take the risk now, I never would. Now, here's where things started to get interesting. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Those first few months after quitting were tough. There were days when I didn't know if I was making the right decision. I was hustling hard. I would clean houses in the morning, meet clients in the afternoon, and work on the business side at night. My entire routine changed. And for a while, I didn't see a huge increase in clients. But I kept working. Around the 5-month mark, things began to pick up. I had a regular base of clients, and referrals started pouring in. Word of mouth worked in my favor. People liked the job I did, and they told others. At that point, I had a decision to make. Should I keep it small and manageable, or should I try to scale it? I decided to scale. I hired my first employee, a cleaner named Maria, who had been in the business for years. I also brought on someone to help with the administrative side, answering calls, scheduling, and managing invoicing. The first couple of months of scaling were chaotic. Training employees, figuring out payroll, setting up systems, it was a lot to handle. But slowly, things started falling into place. Fast forward to today, and I have a small team of 5 people. We're serving more than 30 clients a week, and we're now doing commercial cleaning as well. I still clean myself occasionally because I enjoy it, but I've learned to focus on the bigger picture, marketing, customer relationships, and growing the business. I'm not saying it's been easy. There have been sleepless nights, days when I thought I was failing, and moments where I felt like I was in over my head. But the key has been persistence and adaptability. In the beginning, I was focused on just making it work. Now, I'm focused on making it thrive. What I've learned through this journey is that success doesn't happen overnight. It's not about finding a revolutionary idea. It's about taking a small idea, executing it well, and then having the courage to take risks when the time is right. Most importantly, it's about sticking with it through the tough times and believing in your ability to figure it out along the way. I'm far from done. My goal is to expand to other cities and eventually offer a range of cleaning services, but I'm proud of where I've come from. From the account manager stuck in a cubicle to the small business owner running a team, it's been an incredible journey. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't have to be a genius or have $1 million idea to be an entrepreneur. You just need to start, work hard, and keep moving forward. If I can do it, so can you. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I started my business from my childhood bedroom with nothing but a dream and a worn-out laptop. Fast forward 5 years, and my company now generates millions annually. But getting here wasn't easy. There were plenty of sleepless nights, heart-wrenching failures, and lessons learned the hard way. Here's my journey from being broke, stuck in my small-town life, to building a thriving business that changed everything for me. It all started when I was about 16 years old. Growing up in a small town where opportunities felt scarce, I found myself constantly seeking ways to escape the monotony. I had big dreams, bigger than most of my peers, but no real plan to make them happen. I was good with computers and tech, always tinkering with hardware and software in my free time. One evening, I stumbled upon an article about someone who made money by developing simple apps. That was it. The seed was planted. At first, I had no clue how to code or develop apps. My school didn't offer anything remotely related to tech, and I didn't have any mentors. I decided to teach myself. I spent the next few months hunched over my laptop, watching YouTube tutorials, reading programming forums, and learning everything I could. It was tough at first. I felt like an imposter, but I kept going. I knew if I just stuck with it, something would click. A year later, I launched my first app. It was a simple to-do list app, nothing groundbreaking, just a way to get organized. I spent hours refining the interface, making sure everything looked clean and functional. When I finally published it on the App Store, I felt like I'd won a huge victory, even though I didn't expect much. And, honestly, I didn't get much. The app made a grand total of $30 in the first month. That was a wake-up call. But I wasn't discouraged. I took that $30 as proof that it was possible to make money with tech. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next year, I kept refining my skills. I started to understand the importance of user experience and design, and I learned how to market my apps better. I began developing more complex tools, an expense tracker, a habit-building app, and a few other productivity-based applications. Slowly but surely, I began to see results. By the time I was 18, I had created a small portfolio of apps, and I had learned the importance of monetization. One app, in particular, started to gain traction. It was a budget planner with bill and savings goals, and it was surprisingly popular. That app started bringing in $1,000 a month. It wasn't enough to quit my day job, but it was enough to give me the confidence to keep going. But then, disaster struck. The app's popularity hit a plateau, and revenue began to drop. I had no idea why it was happening. I tried making updates, fixing bugs, and adding new features, but nothing seemed to help. I spent months trying to troubleshoot, but the app just couldn't regain its former momentum. I had put so much energy into this one product that I became discouraged when it didn't work out the way I had hoped. That's when I had a conversation with a fellow developer who had been successful in his own right. He told me something that stuck with me to this day: don't put all your eggs in one basket. He said that successful entrepreneurs always have multiple projects on the go, and they diversify their income streams. That conversation opened my eyes to a whole new approach. I realized that I had been so fixated on one idea that I hadn't considered other avenues for growth. I took a step back, reevaluated my approach, and decided to build a tech startup. I had no business experience, and honestly, I had no idea what I was doing. But I had the technical skills, the drive, and a small savings account from my app earnings. I began researching the startup ecosystem, devouring books and articles about entrepreneurship. It was a steep learning curve, but I was determined. The first thing I did was pivot. I realized that instead of building another app, I should focus on creating a platform that could scale. I decided to focus on a niche I knew well, budgeting and finance. I launched a web-based platform that combined budgeting tools with financial literacy content. The platform allowed users to track their expenses, set savings goals, and learn about managing money through articles and videos. It was a slow start, but I was patient. I used my network to get the word out. I reached out to influencers in the personal finance space, offering them free access to the platform in exchange for feedback and promotion. It was a gamble, but it paid off. Slowly, the platform gained traction. By the time I graduated high school, the platform was averaging around 100,000 active users a month. Still, I wasn't making much money. It was a grind. The breakthrough came when I decided to pivot again and integrate premium features. I started offering a paid subscription model that gave users access to advanced budgeting tools, personalized financial advice, and exclusive content. Within a few months, the paid subscription base grew significantly. I also took the leap to hire a small team of developers to help build out additional features and improve the user experience. By the time I turned 21, I had fully transitioned into being a full-time entrepreneur. My company had grown to the point where we had multiple products, a strong customer base, and a small but dedicated team. I also secured my first round of funding from a group of angel investors who saw the potential in what I was building. This was a pivotal moment. Suddenly, I had resources to expand faster than I ever imagined. Of course, there were still setbacks. The tech industry moves quickly, and competitors were always emerging. I learned that staying ahead of the curve meant constantly innovating. There were moments when I doubted myself, and the pressure to keep up with the competition was overwhelming. But I kept reminding myself of why I started, to help people manage their finances better and achieve financial independence. That kept me going. Today, my business generates millions in revenue, and I'm working on even bigger projects. I've expanded into new markets and launched a mobile app that has attracted millions of downloads. I've also been able to hire a talented team, some of whom have become close friends and mentors. Looking back, I can hardly believe how far I've come. The journey wasn't easy, but every struggle, every setback, and every failure was a stepping stone to success. If there's one thing I've learned along the way, it's that persistence and adaptability are the keys to building a successful business. There's no magic formula, no shortcuts, just hard work, resilience, and the willingness to learn from mistakes. You don't have to know everything from the start. But if you're willing to take risks, put in the effort, and keep improving, success will eventually find you. And anyone reading this who's thinking of starting their own journey, just start. Don't wait for the perfect moment. It won't come. Start with what you have, even if it's just a dream and a laptop. You'd be surprised what you can achieve if you never give up. A few years ago, I was just a regular guy working a 9 to 5 in a corporate job. I was one of those people who hated their job but never quite had the guts to do something about it. I spent years telling myself that I'd leave soon, but soon never came. Then, one day, I had a wake-up call. My father, who had always been a strong figure in my life, passed away suddenly from a heart attack. It was a shock to everyone, and it made me realize just how short and unpredictable life could be. The idea of spending my days in a job I hated, working for someone else's dream, became unbearable. At first, I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a business idea, and I had no clue how to start a company. But what I did have was an idea that had been gnawing at me for years, something I was passionate about: fitness. I had always been into working out, nutrition, and overall health, but I never thought of it as something I could turn into a business. My father's death, however, gave me the push I needed to stop procrastinating and start thinking seriously about how to make a living doing something I loved. So, I took a leap of faith. I quit my corporate job, much to the shock of my family and friends. They all thought I was crazy. I mean, I was giving up a steady paycheck and benefits for something that felt like a gamble. But I was determined to make it work, even though I had no idea where to start. I spent the next few months diving headfirst into the world of fitness. I got certified as a personal trainer and took online courses about business management and marketing. I knew that if I was going to be successful, I needed to equip myself with knowledge and skills, even if it meant working late nights to get everything done. I started out small, offering personal training services to friends and family. I had no gym of my own, so I would meet clients at their homes or local parks. The beginning was tough. I didn't have a steady flow of clients, and I was barely scraping by. Some days, I didn't even know if I could make rent. But I was determined not to give up, so I kept pushing. I started creating fitness content on social media, posting workout videos, and sharing my personal health journey. Slowly, people started noticing. At first, it was just a few likes and comments, but eventually, I gained a modest following. That's when things really started to pick up. One day, I had an idea. Why not create an online fitness program? At the time, online fitness was growing rapidly, but there were still many gaps in the market. I noticed that most fitness programs were either too generic or focused solely on bodybuilding, leaving out other important aspects like nutrition, mental health, and overall well-being. I thought, why not create something holistic? Something that not only focuses on physical fitness but also emphasizes mental health, mindfulness, and sustainable eating habits. With this idea in mind, I got to work. I spent countless hours developing a comprehensive program that combined workouts, meal plans, and motivational content. I launched the program with a simple website and started marketing it through social media, relying on the small following I had built. To my surprise, people loved it. I got my first few sales, and with those sales, I felt like I had found something real. It wasn't easy, but every little success motivated me to keep going. Over the next year, I kept refining the program and improving my marketing strategies. I started offering more personalized services, like one-on-one coaching and consultations, which helped boost my credibility. At the same time, I was constantly testing new marketing strategies. I learned the ins and outs of Facebook ads, influencer partnerships, and email marketing. The key was consistency. I kept posting regularly, responding to every message and comment, and slowly but surely, my business started growing. It was still a grind, but the results were starting to show. Then came the breakthrough moment. I received an email from a well-known fitness influencer who had come across my program and was interested in collaborating. They wanted to feature my program on their platform in exchange for a partnership deal. I couldn't believe it. This was the kind of opportunity one had dreamed of. I jumped at the chance and worked closely with the influencer to create an exclusive offer for their followers. The collaboration went viral. Sales skyrocketed, and I gained thousands of new customers in a matter of days. With the influx of new clients, I was able to hire a small team to help with customer service, marketing, and content creation. This allowed me to focus more on expanding the business and building a brand. Over time, my online fitness program became a full-fledged business. I developed a mobile app, launched a subscription service, and even started offering fitness products like supplements and workout gear. Every time I thought things were starting to settle down, something bigger came along. The business kept growing, and with each new challenge, I learned and adapted. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. There were plenty of bumps along the way. I had to learn the hard way that scaling a business comes with its own set of challenges. I had cash flow problems at one point because I underestimated how much capital I would need to keep up with demand. I had to take out a small loan to keep things afloat, but that decision ended up paying off. I also faced burnout multiple times. Running a business on your own is exhausting, and there were many nights I stayed up working until 3 a.m. to meet deadlines. It wasn't glamorous, but it was worth it. Today, my fitness business is thriving. I have hundreds of clients from all over the world, and my team has grown to include a marketing manager, a content creator, and a customer support team. We've expanded into multiple revenue streams, from online courses to physical products, and we continue to innovate and adapt to the ever-changing market. What's more, I feel like I've found my purpose. I'm doing something I truly love, and I'm helping people live healthier, happier lives. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come from that moment of uncertainty after my father's death. It's easy to get lost in the daily grind, but I've learned that it's important to take risks, follow your passion, and trust yourself. The road to entrepreneurship isn't easy, but it's one of the most rewarding experiences you can have. I'm proof that it's never too late to start over, to reinvent yourself, and to build something that can change your life. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that success isn't about avoiding failure. It's about picking yourself up every time you fall and pushing forward, no matter what. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Just start. This is a story about how I went from being a broke college dropout to owning a seven-figure business, and the crazy lessons I learned along the way. I was never a business genius, but I found a way to make things work, and that's what matters. Hopefully, this will inspire someone out there to take the leap, or at least make you feel like you're not alone in your struggles. I was never the academic type. I dropped out of college after 2 years, mostly because I was bored and didn't feel like what I was learning was going to get me anywhere. I'm not saying college is a waste of time, but for me, it just wasn't clicking. I was living off student loans and working part-time at a local restaurant, trying to make ends meet. Things were tight, and I felt completely lost. One day, I was talking to my friend, Sam, who had always been into side hustles and making money. He had started a small drop-shipping business while still in school, and I remember being both impressed and skeptical at the same time. He showed me his Shopify store, where he was selling custom phone cases, and he was making a few $1,000s a month. At the time, it seemed like a pipe dream, but I figured I had nothing to lose. I took out a small loan from a family member, scraped together every dollar I could find, and launched my own dropshipping business. It was a disaster. The first few months were a blur of mistakes, learning, and frustration. I barely made any sales, and the few orders I did get were mostly from people I knew. But Sam kept encouraging me to stick with it, and I eventually started to get the hang of things. The turning point came when I decided to start selling a niche product. I'd been following trends online and noticed that people were really into custom skateboard decks. I thought, why not? I found a supplier, created a brand around it, and launched a website. To my surprise, the first month was a huge success. I made more money than I had in the past 6 months combined. It wasn't a ton, but it was enough to give me some confidence. The next few months were a blur of late nights, long hours, and constantly tweaking my marketing strategy. I had to learn everything from scratch: how to run Facebook ads, how to optimize my website, how to deal with customer service. I spent hours every day consuming content about entrepreneurship and marketing. Slowly but surely, the sales started rolling in. By the time I hit my first $10,000 month, I was hooked. I knew I couldn't go back to the restaurant job. But of course, the road wasn't smooth sailing. I ran into issues with suppliers who couldn't deliver on time, and customers started complaining. There were weeks where I barely made a profit after covering costs. And then there was the time I accidentally ran a Facebook ad that violated their policies and had my account banned for a week. My blood pressure was through the roof. It felt like everything was falling apart. One of the biggest lessons I learned was that failure is part of the process. At first, every setback felt like the end of the world. But over time, I realized that it's just part of the journey. You'll never learn if everything goes perfectly. You have to embrace failure and use it as a tool for growth. That's not to say it's easy, but it gets easier once you accept that it's coming, and there's not much you can do to avoid it. Around the same time, I started to experiment with influencer marketing. I reached out to a few Instagram influencers who had decent followings in the skateboarding community, offering them free products in exchange for posts about my brand. At first, the results were underwhelming. But then one influencer with a massive following posted about my skateboards, and sales went through the roof. I couldn't believe it. That influencer post catapulted my business to new heights. I hired a small team, expanded my product line, and began reinvesting profits into paid advertising. The business grew quickly, but with growth came new challenges. I had to learn how to manage employees, deal with taxes, handle logistics, and more. Suddenly, I wasn't just an entrepreneur. I was a CEO. I hit my first $100,000 month about a year after I first launched the business. It felt surreal. I remember sitting in my apartment, staring at my computer screen, trying to wrap my head around it. But the feeling didn't last long. The next day, I realized that $100,000 months weren't the end goal. There was still so much more I needed to do to grow and scale. I started looking at ways to diversify my income streams, so I wasn't reliant on just one product or one marketing strategy. I also started to focus on building a brand rather than just selling products. I wanted people to not only buy from me, but to feel connected to what I was offering. I began working on building a community around my business, engaging with customers through social media, creating content, and even collaborating with other brands. I learned the importance of customer loyalty and how building a tribe can be more valuable than just selling a product. The business continued to grow, and eventually, I hit the seven-figure revenue mark. It wasn't as glamorous as I thought it would be. Instead of feeling like I'd made it, I felt more pressure. There was always another hurdle, another challenge. But at that point, I had learned to take it all in stride. I was no longer afraid of failure because I had experienced it so many times before. Looking back, I don't think there was one single moment that made me successful. It was a combination of luck, timing, hard work, and persistence. If I had given up after the first few failures, I wouldn't be where I am today. The key to success is simple. Never stop learning, keep taking risks, and don't be afraid to fail. That's what got me from a broke college dropout to a successful entrepreneur. Now, I'm in a position where I can afford to take more risks. I've invested in other businesses, explored different industries, and even started mentoring other entrepreneurs who are just starting out. I still make mistakes, but I no longer see them as failures. Instead, I see them as opportunities to learn and grow. I've learned that the road to success is long, hard, and full of twists and turns, but it's worth it. I wouldn't change a thing. So, if you're reading this and you're struggling with your business or just don't know where to start, don't give up. Keep going, keep learning, and keep taking risks. You never know where it might lead. That's the beauty of entrepreneurship. I had always been that person who dreamed big but never seemed to make any real progress. I worked at a local call center for what felt like forever, doing the same thing every day, dealing with irate customers, and wondering if there was more to life than just answering calls. I wasn't living. I was just existing. And I knew it, deep down. But I was stuck. The idea of starting a business seemed as foreign as flying to Mars. The stories I read online about people building their companies from the ground up always sounded like they belonged in some other world, far removed from the reality I was living. But something happened a few years ago that shifted my perspective. I had been with the call center for 6 years when I got a text from an old friend. His message was simple. "Hey man, you ever thought about starting your own business?" We had kept in touch, but he was now living in another city, doing his own thing. He had always been the entrepreneurial type, the guy who had side hustles going all the time, while I was stuck in my 9-to-5 rut. I remember laughing when I read it, replying with something like, "Yeah, I think about it all the time, but I have no idea where to start." He came back with a pretty unexpected response. "Why not sell stuff online? It doesn't take much to get started, and you're smart enough to figure it out. You don't need a fancy office or a big investment to start something." That text really hit me. I had never seriously considered e-commerce before. I'd bought things online, sure, but actually running an online store? That felt like a whole different world. But what my friend said made sense. It wasn't like I had anything to lose. I wasn't exactly happy with my job, and I certainly didn't think it was going to be my career for the next 30 years. I figured, why not give it a shot? The next couple of months were a blur of research. I spent every spare moment I had reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and browsing forums. I was on Reddit a lot, especially r/entrepreneur and r/entrepreneurship, trying to soak up any information I could. The more I learned, the more I realized that e-commerce didn't have to be complicated. It wasn't about having the best products or the most flashy website. It was about finding a niche, building a brand, and offering something of value. At first, I thought about selling physical products like gadgets or clothes, but I quickly realized that I had no idea what I was doing in those areas. The thought of managing inventory, dealing with suppliers, and handling returns overwhelmed me. So, I started to think outside the box. I had always been interested in personal development, and I noticed there was a growing demand for self-improvement content. I figured that if I could tap into that market, I could create something valuable without the heavy lifting that comes with physical products. I decided to sell digital products, ebooks, courses, and guides on personal growth and productivity. I created a simple website using Shopify, which I could afford even on my tight budget, and spent hours designing the layout and figuring out the best way to market my products. I kept the initial offerings basic, just a few PDF guides on time management, goal setting, and mindfulness, but it felt like a huge leap forward from where I had been. I spent the next few months learning the ropes of digital marketing, especially social media. I knew that building a brand on platforms like Instagram and Facebook would be essential to gaining traction. I started posting quotes, short tips, and snippets from my guides, hoping to build a following. It was slow at first. For the longest time, I didn't see much movement. A few followers here and there, some likes on my posts, but nothing that screamed success. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. Then, out of nowhere, a post I made went viral. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple quote about the importance of starting your day with a morning routine, but something about it struck a chord. People started sharing it, commenting on it, and suddenly my follower count was going up rapidly. It was a turning point. I realized that if I could tap into this type of content, I could really grow my audience. From that point on, I started to refine my strategy. I began posting more frequently, engaging with my followers, and offering more free content. The more I gave, the more people seemed to appreciate it. My sales started picking up, and I was finally able to quit my call center job after about a year of working on the side. It wasn't an instant success story. I still had a lot to learn and plenty of mistakes to make, but I was finally on my way. The next couple of years were a roller coaster. I reinvested every penny I made back into the business, upgrading my website, launching more products, and running ads to expand my reach. I started building an email list, offering free resources in exchange for signups, and soon my business was generating a steady stream of income. I was finally making money doing something I was passionate about. But like any entrepreneur, I faced my share of challenges. I struggled with self-doubt, managing time, and staying consistent when things weren't going as planned. There were months where I questioned whether I was even cut out for this, whether I should just go back to a regular job. But every time I hit a rough patch, I remembered that I had already made it this far. I wasn't going to give up now. Today, I run a small but sustainable business. I've expanded my product offerings, hired a small team to help with content creation and customer support, and most importantly, I wake up every day excited to work. I'm still learning and growing, but I'm proud of how far I've come. It hasn't been easy, and I still face challenges, but it's worth it. I'm in control of my future now, and that's something I never thought I'd be able to say. The point of this story? If you're stuck in a job you hate, if you feel like there's no way out, just know that it's possible to make a change. It won't happen overnight, and it won't be easy, but it's worth it. You don't need to have all the answers at the beginning. You don't need to be an expert. You just need to start. You'll learn as you go, and if you stick with it, you might just surprise yourself. So, here's to anyone out there who feels like they're stuck. There's always a way out. It may not be the easiest path, but it's worth it if it means living a life that actually excites you. Thanks for reading my story. I hope it helps someone out there who's thinking about taking the leap. Just remember, every journey starts with one small step, and that step might just be the one that changes everything. I was 23 when I started my business, broke and living with my parents. I had no clue about what I was doing, but I had a vision. It wasn't a revolutionary idea. In fact, it was probably one of the most basic things you could think of. I wanted to start a car detailing business. I knew cars, loved them, and figured I could make a few bucks cleaning them. Little did I know, that would be the beginning of a journey that would eventually change my life. The first year was rough. I'm talking bare bones tough. I was washing cars out of a small garage my parents let me use, with nothing more than a couple of buckets, a hose, and some old towels I found lying around. My office was literally my parents' kitchen table where I spent countless nights filling out forms, trying to figure out how to make a business plan. There were times when I doubted whether I could make it. I'd watch people around me get good jobs and live their lives while I struggled to make ends meet. But I had one thing most people didn't: persistence. I worked every day, marketing my service for free on social media, offering discounts to anyone who would listen. I had no money for ads, so I made it my mission to get attention any way I could. I remember the first time someone actually paid for a full detailing job. It was $100, and it felt like a fortune to me. I was thrilled, not just for the money, but for the validation. It proved that people were willing to pay for what I was offering. It was my first real win. But there was no time to rest on my laurels. I was constantly running into obstacles. I had no professional tools, so I had to improvise with whatever I could afford. One time, I used a cheap $15 vacuum cleaner that kept shutting off every 10 minutes. It was beyond frustrating, but I kept going. I knew that if I could just keep improving my process, I could turn this into something. Eventually, I scraped together enough money to invest in a better vacuum, a pressure washer, and some industrial-grade detailing supplies. The real turning point came when I decided to invest in my own website. I had been relying on word of mouth and social media, but I needed something more professional. I taught myself basic web design, learned about SEO, and spent weeks crafting a website that would showcase my services. The first few months after launching it were slow. I didn't see an immediate return on investment, but I kept pushing. And then, slowly, people started finding me online. That's when I realized just how important it was to have an online presence. My first big break came when a local influencer who had thousands of followers posted a review of my service. My phone didn't stop ringing for weeks. That moment is when I started to understand the power of building a brand. It wasn't just about detailing cars anymore. It was about creating a reputation. I started offering special services like ceramic coating and paint correction. My prices were higher than competitors, but I always made sure to offer an experience that made customers feel like they were getting more than just a car wash. At the same time, I was learning about customer service, and it became clear to me that this was a huge part of the puzzle. It wasn't just about doing a good job. It was about making the whole process seamless and memorable. I invested in professional-grade uniforms for myself and my small team. I made sure we were always punctual and treated every customer like they were our top priority. I began seeing repeat business, which was the real game changer. Happy customers tell their friends, and those friends tell more people, and so on. My business was growing. But as the business expanded, I started facing new challenges. Hiring employees was difficult. I wasn't ready to trust anyone with the quality of work I had painstakingly perfected, but I knew I couldn't do it all myself forever. I hired 2 people in my first year of expanding, and it was a huge mistake. They didn't share my work ethic, and I spent more time fixing their mistakes than I did running the business. So, I made the decision to let them go. After that, I decided to hire only people who had proven experience in detailing. I wanted the best. The moment I started hiring professionals, the business took off even more. The hardest part about growing the business was managing cash flow. There were months where I had to put every dollar I earned back into the company to buy supplies, pay for rent, and keep up with the overhead. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in debt. I had to learn the hard way how to balance spending and saving, but I learned quickly. I started tracking everything meticulously, using accounting software, and keeping a budget. The more organized I became with the financial side of things, the more sustainable my growth was. By the time I was 28, my business was profitable enough that I could hire a manager and start focusing on new ventures. I expanded my services to include mobile detailing, where we would go to customers' homes or offices. This helped us reach a larger audience, and it was the perfect solution for busy clients who didn't have time to come to us. I also began offering packages for corporate fleets, which turned out to be a goldmine. Over the next few years, I focused on scaling and building a team that was capable of handling larger contracts. I diversified the business by adding high-end detailing for luxury cars and high-volume services for dealerships. Slowly but surely, my small business grew into a multi-location operation. We had 3 locations by the time I turned 30, and I had a team of over 30 employees. I can honestly say none of this would have been possible without the failures I experienced in the early years. Every mistake, every customer complaint, every sleepless night, it all contributed to my growth as a business owner. But the most important lesson I learned was this: it's not about the idea you start with, it's about the perseverance to keep going. The process of building a business isn't glamorous. It's messy, it's exhausting, and sometimes it feels like you're just treading water. But the key is to never stop. Today, I'm sitting in an office that overlooks the city. I own a successful business that I've built from the ground up. The long hours, the struggles, and the doubts all seem like a distant memory, but they were the foundation of what I have now. I still work hard, and I'm still pushing to grow, but now, I'm smarter about it. I've learned that success isn't just about what you can do alone. It's about what you can build with a team, and that's been my biggest revelation. So, to anyone out there thinking of starting their own business, don't give up, even when it feels like everything is against you. Your first year is going to suck. Your second year will be just as hard, and you'll wonder if it's all worth it. But if you keep going, if you stay hungry and keep improving, you'll see the light at the end of the tunnel. The road is long, but the reward is worth it. Keep your head down, keep grinding, and success will come. This is the story of how I built my e-commerce business from scratch and ended up quitting my day job in under 2 years. I know this might sound like a typical success story you hear on Reddit, but the truth is, it wasn't easy. It was a roller coaster ride, full of ups and downs, and there were a lot of things I learned the hard way. But if you're thinking of starting your own business, especially in e-commerce, I hope my story can offer some valuable insights. I'll start by giving you some context. I had a regular 9 to 5 job that paid well, but I was unfulfilled. The work didn't excite me, and I was constantly daydreaming about building something of my own. One day, I found myself scrolling through Reddit, reading about how other people were quitting their jobs and starting businesses. I remember thinking, why can't I do that? I didn't have a huge sum of money saved up, and I definitely didn't have any prior experience in entrepreneurship. But I had an idea. I wanted to sell something online. Not just any random product, though. I wanted something that would tap into a niche market and provide real value. After a bit of brainstorming, I decided on selling custom phone cases. It wasn't the most original idea in the world, but I knew there was potential in offering personalized products. I was convinced there was a market for unique, high-quality phone cases that stood out from the typical, mass-produced ones. I spent a couple of weeks doing research, reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and browsing forums like Reddit to figure out how I could start my e-commerce business on a budget. I had zero technical skills when it came to web design or digital marketing, but I wasn't about to let that stop me. I set a goal. I would launch my store in 30 days. This gave me just enough time to do the groundwork and learn what I needed to know. The first thing I did was set up a basic website. I used Shopify because it seemed like the easiest option for someone like me who didn't know anything about coding or web design. I'm not going to lie, it was overwhelming at first. I didn't know how to design a website that would look professional or how to write copy that would convert visitors into customers. But I kept pushing forward. Every night, after my day job, I would work on my website. Sometimes I'd get frustrated and think about quitting, but then I'd remind myself why I was doing this. To build something on my own and have the freedom to control my future. Next, I sourced the products. I found a supplier that offered customizable phone cases. I had a bit of trouble at first, as I didn't understand the intricacies of quality control and shipping times. But I stuck with it and learned through trial and error. I started placing small orders to test out the designs, and I learned how to communicate with the supplier about the type of cases I wanted and the quality I expected. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As I was building the website, I knew I had to drive traffic to it. This was the part that terrified me the most. I had no idea how to market my store. I'd read a lot about social media marketing, paid ads, and influencer collaborations, but I didn't know where to start. I decided to try Facebook and Instagram ads because they seemed like the easiest way to get started. I set a small budget of $10 a day, hoping to see some results without blowing all my savings. The first few weeks were incredibly frustrating. I had a few clicks on my ads, but no sales. I started doubting myself. Was my idea just stupid? Did no one care about custom phone cases? I almost gave up, but then I remembered something I read on Reddit. If you're not failing, you're not learning. So, I kept tweaking my ads. I changed the visuals, I changed the copy, and I tested different targeting options. Slowly but surely, I started seeing more traffic. But here's where the breakthrough happened. I started engaging with my audience on social media. Instead of just posting ads and hoping people would buy, I began sharing content that was relevant to my target market. I posted design inspiration, behind-the-scenes footage of my production process, and user-generated content. I asked people to share photos of their personalized phone cases, and I reposted them on my social media channels. This built a sense of community, and over time, people started recognizing my brand. They started to trust me. Sales began to trickle in. Not a lot, but enough to keep me motivated. I was barely making enough to cover my ad spend, but it was a start. I kept improving my marketing, investing more time into creating content, and learning from my mistakes. I also started tracking every aspect of my business, conversion rates, traffic sources, customer feedback, and used that data to refine my strategy. After about 6 months, I started seeing more consistent sales. I was still working my day job, but my side hustle was growing. I hired a part-time virtual assistant to help with customer service and order fulfillment. I also started looking into expanding my product line. It wasn't long before I launched a new collection of phone cases targeted at a completely different demographic, dog lovers. The new collection was a hit, and sales jumped significantly. Around the 9-month mark, I had a solid customer base. The revenue was steady enough that I was able to quit my day job. I remember the day I handed in my resignation letter. It felt surreal. I was finally going to be my own boss. But even then, I knew the work was far from over. I continued to reinvest the profits back into the business, growing my brand and expanding my marketing efforts. I started working with influencers to promote my products, which helped me gain even more exposure. I also expanded to selling on other platforms like Amazon and Etsy, which brought in additional revenue. One of the biggest lessons I learned during this journey was that entrepreneurship is not a straight path. There were times when I felt completely lost, when I doubted my decisions, and when things didn't go according to plan. But I kept pushing through. I learned to embrace failure as a learning opportunity and realize that success doesn't happen overnight. Looking back, I can honestly say that starting my own business was the best decision I ever made. It's been 2 years since I quit my day job, and my business continues to grow. I've learned so much about marketing, customer service, and what it takes to run a successful e-commerce business. And while there are still challenges ahead, I wouldn't trade the journey for anything. If you're thinking about starting your own business, don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect idea. Just start. Learn as you go, and don't be afraid to fail. In the end, the only way to succeed is to keep moving forward. I had been working in a corporate job for over 5 years when I decided to take the leap into entrepreneurship. The decision wasn't made overnight. In fact, it took me almost a year of sleepless nights, endless brainstorming, and an uncomfortable amount of self-doubt. But when I finally made the decision to quit my job, I felt a rush of excitement and fear at the same time. It all started in the middle of a typical 9-to-5 grind. I was working as a marketing analyst for a mid-sized company, and although I had steady pay, benefits, and security, something just wasn't right. I was bored, uninspired, and constantly felt like I was working for someone else's dream, not my own. I had ideas, big ideas, but they were always put on hold as I focused on the work that paid the bills. One evening, I was scrolling through Reddit as usual, and I stumbled upon a post from a guy who had quit his corporate job to start a business selling handmade leather wallets. His story was filled with passion, setbacks, and small victories. It resonated with me in a way I hadn't experienced before. The post ended with a simple sentence: "I'm so glad I took the risk. I don't have to ask for time off anymore. I get to create my own future." That sentence stuck with me. I had always dreamed of building something of my own, but the thought of leaving behind my steady paycheck was terrifying. Yet, here was someone who was doing it, someone who had turned a hobby into a full-time business. If he could do it, why couldn't I? Over the next few months, I began seriously considering the idea of entrepreneurship. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew I had to find something that would spark the same excitement I had felt while reading that Reddit post. I started researching various business ideas. I looked into everything from online retail to software development, but nothing seemed to stick. My real passion was digital marketing, so I decided to take a risk and turn that into my business. I would start my own digital marketing agency. I spent hours learning everything I could about starting a business. I read books, watched countless videos, and even took a few online courses. One of the biggest things I learned was the importance of networking. I started reaching out to other entrepreneurs in the digital marketing space, attending local networking events, and connecting with potential clients. Slowly but surely, I built a small but solid network of contacts who were willing to take a chance on my services. I also realized that I couldn't do everything on my own. I wasn't an expert in every aspect of digital marketing, and trying to handle everything would only lead to burnout. So, I started outsourcing tasks to freelancers. I found a graphic designer, a content writer, and even a virtual assistant who helped me stay organized and manage the workload. I quickly learned that surrounding myself with a team of experts made all the difference. But the road wasn't always easy. In fact, it was full of challenges from the very beginning. My first client was a small local business that wanted to improve its online presence. I had no portfolio, no proven track record, but I had confidence and determination. I offered them a discounted rate in exchange for their feedback and a testimonial. They agreed, and I got to work. The first few weeks were a blur. I was working late into the night, building their website, creating social media strategies, and handling their Google Ads campaigns. There were moments when I wondered if I was in over my head. I was juggling my full-time job with building a business, and it felt like I never had a break. But then something amazing happened. The client started seeing results. Their website traffic increased, their social media engagement grew, and they even made a few sales from the ads I managed. That success, however small, was exactly what I needed to boost my confidence. I had proven to myself that I could actually do this. I asked the client for a testimonial, and they were more than happy to provide one. That testimonial became the cornerstone of my business's marketing efforts. I used it on my website in pitch emails and on social media. Slowly but surely, I began to gain more clients. As the business grew, so did the challenges. There were months when cash flow was tight, and I had to hustle to secure enough clients to cover my expenses. But those moments taught me valuable lessons about managing finances, budgeting, and the importance of saving for lean times. I learned to prioritize clients who were a good fit for my services and to say no to opportunities that didn't align with my goals. I also realized the importance of setting boundaries and making time for myself, something that was hard for me in the beginning. One of the most difficult moments came when I lost a major client. They had been one of my first and had been with me for months. However, due to budget cuts on their end, they decided to part ways. I was devastated. That client had been the bulk of my income, and losing them felt like a punch to the gut. I spent the next few days questioning myself, wondering if I was cut out for this. But I quickly reminded myself that setbacks were part of the journey. I didn't let it stop me. Instead, I used it as fuel to find new clients. It took time, but I eventually replaced that income and grew my business even further. One of the best decisions I made early on was to invest in professional help. I hired an accountant to manage my taxes and finances, which freed up my time to focus on growing the business. I also joined a mastermind group with other entrepreneurs, which allowed me to learn from others, share ideas, and hold myself accountable. These relationships were invaluable, and they helped me navigate the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. As the years went by, my digital marketing agency began to thrive. I was finally able to quit my corporate job and work full-time on my business. The sense of freedom I felt was indescribable. I could travel when I wanted, set my own hours, and, most importantly, I was building something that was entirely my own. I had created a business that not only supported my lifestyle but also gave me a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. There were days when I thought I would fail, days when I felt like giving up. But I kept going. I kept learning. I kept pushing through the tough times, and now I'm reaping the rewards. My business has grown, and I've even started a second venture. It hasn't been easy, but every challenge has been worth it. I've learned more about myself than I ever thought possible, and I'm proud of what I've built. If there's one piece of advice I can give to anyone thinking about starting their own business, it's this: don't be afraid to take risks. It's going to be hard, but if you have the drive and determination, you can make it work. The journey is never linear, but it's the struggle and the victories along the way that make it all worth it. I'm still learning, still growing, and I know there will be more challenges ahead. But I'm no longer afraid of what comes next. I'm ready for it. And if I can do it, so can you. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I started my business with nothing but a broken laptop and a few $1,000 I had saved from my previous job. It's hard to believe that I'm now running a successful tech startup with a growing team of over 30 people. But the journey to get here wasn't as smooth as it sounds. In fact, it's been a roller coaster of failures, tough decisions, and a whole lot of grit. I was in my mid-20s, working a corporate job in marketing for a well-known company. I was making decent money, had health benefits, and a stable future. But I always felt that something was missing. I hated the 9-to-5 grind and the lack of freedom. There were days when I would look at the clock, counting down the minutes until the end of the day. I knew deep down that I wanted something more. But at the time, I didn't know what that something was. One night, after a particularly brutal day at work, I was at a bar with some friends. We were talking about the future, and I vented about how miserable I was in my job. One of my friends, who worked in the tech industry, casually mentioned something about creating a mobile app that solves a simple but frustrating problem. It was something as mundane as a better way to manage your daily tasks, something that could integrate seamlessly with the different calendars, reminders, and to-do lists that people used every day. At the time, it sounded like a niche idea, but something about it clicked. I started researching the app market the very next day. I spent hours scouring the internet, reading up on app development, looking for similar products, and analyzing customer feedback. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that this was my opportunity. I didn't have any tech background, so I knew I needed a co-founder with technical expertise. I posted on a few forums and started networking with developers, hoping to find someone who was passionate about building apps. Eventually, I found a guy named Steve. He had a solid track record of building mobile apps and had recently left his job at a big tech company. We hit it off immediately, and after a few meetings, we agreed to partner up. We didn't have any investors at the time, so we were operating on a shoestring budget. I had enough savings to cover our initial costs, and Steve had a small freelance gig that was paying the bills while he worked on the app in his spare time. We rented a tiny co-working space in the city, which was basically a glorified closet with a desk and a couple of chairs. But it was our space, and it felt like the beginning of something big. We worked tirelessly on the app. At first, it was slow. We spent months designing the interface, perfecting the user experience, and coding the backend. I learned how to do basic marketing and outreach, how to build an email list, how to optimize for App Store search results, and how to get beta users to give us feedback. There were times when we thought about quitting. The app wasn't as polished as we wanted, and we were barely getting any traction. But we kept pushing forward. We released our first version, and honestly, it was rough. The interface was clunky, some features didn't work as well as expected, and there were bugs. But something amazing happened. People started downloading it. Slowly at first, but then the downloads began to pick up. We got some great feedback from early users who pointed out bugs, but also praised the idea. It was clear there was a market for what we were building. However, it wasn't smooth sailing from there. The app had potential, but there were constant challenges. We ran into financial troubles more than once. At one point, we couldn't afford to pay ourselves, and I had to put personal bills on hold just to keep the business afloat. I remember one week when we were down to our last few $100s, and we weren't sure how we were going to pay for the next round of App Store fees. I wasn't even sure if the business would make it another month. But then, out of nowhere, a big break came. We were featured in a popular tech blog, and within hours, our download numbers shot up. People were starting to notice us. Investors began reaching out, wanting to know more. Steve and I were cautious, but we knew this was the moment we had been waiting for. We ended up raising our first round of funding, a small amount, but enough to keep us going and bring on a few more developers to help scale the app. Over the next few months, we worked relentlessly to improve the app. We fixed bugs, added new features, and focused heavily on customer support. Every night, we were either coding or analyzing user feedback to make sure we were going in the right direction. Slowly but surely, our user base grew, and we started seeing some real revenue. We were no longer living paycheck to paycheck, and we even hired a few more people to help with marketing and customer support. The tipping point came when we launched a feature that completely changed the way people use the app. We integrated a smart scheduling tool that allowed users to sync all their calendars and automatically suggest optimal times for meetings or personal tasks. It was a game changer. Users loved it, and word of mouth spread like wildfire. From there, things snowballed. Our app was consistently ranking among the top productivity apps on the App Store, and we were receiving attention from big-name companies who wanted to integrate with us. We expanded our team, raised more money, and began working on new projects. By the time we hit our 2-year mark, we had crossed over 1 million active users, and our revenue was in the millions. But the biggest lesson I've learned throughout this journey is that success doesn't happen overnight. It takes years of hard work, failures, and learning from mistakes. There were countless times I wanted to quit, moments when it felt like everything was falling apart. But those challenges were the lessons that shaped me into the entrepreneur I am today. The key to success is persistence, sticking with it even when things seem impossible. Now, looking back, I'm proud of what we've built, but I know it's only the beginning. We're working on new features and innovations to stay ahead of the competition. I've learned that entrepreneurship is about being adaptable, learning quickly, and surrounding yourself with a great team. It's not easy, but it's worth it. And to anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, don't wait for the perfect moment. There will never be a perfect moment. Just start and make the best of what you have. Now, my days are filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and figuring out how to scale even further. But even when it gets overwhelming, I never forget where I started, back in that tiny co-working space with a broken laptop, just trying to make something work. And every time I get a message from a user telling me how much our app has helped them, I remember why I took the leap in the first place. I wouldn't change a thing. I'm an entrepreneur and, like many, my journey was full of ups and downs, but looking back, it's been a ride worth every second. My name's Alex, and this is the story of how I built my business from scratch. It all started about 5 years ago when I was just another college graduate trying to find my way. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, but one thing I knew for sure: I hated the idea of working a 9-to-5 job. It just didn't seem like the life I wanted. I went to college with a vague interest in business, but it wasn't until my senior year that the entrepreneurial bug bit me. I was tired of hearing about people who had made it big by taking risks and chasing their dreams. So, I decided to take a leap of my own. After graduation, I didn't take the corporate job offers that came my way. Instead, I borrowed money from my parents and started my first business, an online store that sold eco-friendly products. The idea came from my frustration with the environmental crisis and the lack of easily accessible green products. I started researching the industry, found a reliable supplier, and launched my store in a matter of months. I had no experience in e-commerce, marketing, or even business management, but I was determined to make it work. My first website was a mess. I used a free template, didn't understand SEO, and had no idea what I was doing with my product descriptions. But I was excited. I figured, how hard could it be? Sales were slow. Like, really slow. I was getting maybe a handful of orders a week, and most of them were from friends and family. I'd stay up late trying to figure out why no one was visiting the site. I quickly learned about the importance of marketing, but I didn't have the money for ads. I turned to social media, thinking that if I posted enough, something would go viral. That didn't happen. I wasn't getting any traction, and the little cash I had saved from working part-time in college was quickly disappearing. I was frustrated. I started second-guessing my decision to launch a business in the first place. My friends would ask me how the store was going, and I'd smile and tell them everything was fine, but deep down, I was panicking. I kept thinking, what if I just throw in the towel? But then, one day, I had a breakthrough. I decided to attend a local entrepreneur meetup. It felt out of my comfort zone, but I was desperate for some advice. I sat through a few presentations and heard from other entrepreneurs who had been through the same struggles. A few of them had successful businesses, and they were kind enough to share their stories. One piece of advice stuck with me. You have to focus on your niche. Don't try to be everything to everyone. Find your tribe and serve them well. It was a simple idea, but it made sense. I had been trying to appeal to a broad audience, thinking that more people would mean more sales. But I wasn't targeting the right group. That night, I went home and completely overhauled my website and marketing strategy. I focused solely on eco-conscious millennials, a group that cared about sustainability and had the disposable income to invest in eco-friendly products. I narrowed my product range, worked on my website design, and started posting content that resonated with my target audience. Things started to pick up. Slowly, but steadily, sales began to increase. I used social media to connect with influencers in the sustainability space, and they started promoting my products. Word of mouth spread, and within a few months, I was finally seeing a decent income. I could breathe again. But even as sales were growing, there were still challenges. I was running everything on my own: marketing, customer service, product sourcing, and fulfillment. I was working 12-hour days, 7 days a week. I knew I needed help, but I was hesitant to hire anyone. What if the business didn't make it? What if I couldn't afford the wages? But after a particularly exhausting week, I realized I couldn't do it all myself. I needed to scale. So, I took the plunge and hired my first employee. She was a college student, part-time, and helped me with customer service and order fulfillment. That was a game changer. She freed up my time to focus on growing the business and working on new marketing strategies. Soon after, I hired a freelance graphic designer to help with content and branding. The business started running more smoothly, and I could finally work on the big picture. As the business grew, I learned the importance of systems and processes. I built out an efficient workflow for inventory management, hired a full-time marketing team, and outsourced the fulfillment to a third-party logistics company. I also started paying closer attention to my finances. At one point, I had nearly gone bankrupt because I hadn't been tracking my cash flow properly. I couldn't afford to make that mistake again, so I invested in a solid accounting system and hired a part-time bookkeeper. Fast forward a couple of years, and my business was doing well. We were making 6 figures in revenue, and I was finally able to pay off the money I borrowed from my parents. I had an amazing team, a loyal customer base, and most importantly, I had time to step back and think about the future. But that's when the next challenge hit. The market was getting saturated. Every time I'd search for eco-friendly products, a new competitor seemed to pop up. Prices were being undercut, and it was harder to maintain the profit margins that had once been so comfortable. I realized that if I didn't innovate, my business would start to decline. So, I made the decision to diversify. I expanded into new product lines, introduced a subscription model for recurring orders, and started offering consulting services for other businesses looking to become more sustainable. The diversification worked. My revenue grew even more, and I was able to build a brand that was known for more than just eco-friendly products. I was helping other businesses adopt sustainable practices, and that felt even more rewarding than the initial success of my online store. I've had my fair share of failures and mistakes along the way, failed product launches, a bad partnership, a few marketing campaigns that completely flopped, but looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. Every misstep taught me something valuable. Today, my business is thriving, and I'm grateful for every lesson learned. The entrepreneurial journey isn't easy, but if you're passionate, persistent, and willing to learn from your mistakes, it's worth every bit of effort. If I could give any advice to aspiring entrepreneurs, it would be this: don't be afraid to fail. Failure isn't the end. It's a lesson, a stepping stone. Be prepared to put in the work, because it's not going to be glamorous at first. But when you stick with it, and you're able to turn those struggles into opportunities, that's when the real success happens. 5 years ago, I never could have imagined how far I'd come. Now, I'm not just a business owner. I'm a mentor, an advocate for sustainability, and someone who finally feels like I'm living my dream. It's been a wild ride, but I wouldn't change a thing. This is a long one, but if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, I think it might give you some perspective. Here's my story of how I went from broke and broken to building a company worth a few $1 million in less than 5 years. It's not a success story from the get-go. It's full of failure, mistakes, and some really stupid decisions along the way, but it's real, and I hope it helps someone. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, a place where most people have no idea what a startup even is. My parents were solid working-class folks, and I was the first one in my family to attend college. I didn't come from money, but I had a lot of ambition. I had this idealistic notion that if you worked hard enough, you could achieve anything. And that was my mistake. After graduating with a business degree, I decided I was going to be a millionaire by 30. I had big dreams of creating a product that would change the world, something that could disrupt an entire industry. No idea what, but I was sure I would figure it out. I got a job at a big consulting firm in Chicago and quickly learned that my idealistic views were a joke in the real world. People weren't working hard just for the sake of it. They were working hard to climb the corporate ladder, make money, and get out. That's when I started seeing how broken the system was. I knew I had to do something different, but I didn't know what. At 25, I quit my job and moved back to my small hometown. I had saved a little bit of money, and I thought, this is it. It's time to start my business. I didn't have a plan, no product, no customers, and honestly, not much business sense. But I had that hunger, the same hunger that drives a lot of entrepreneurs to make big bets with no real backing. I started doing some freelance marketing work for local businesses, thinking it would give me enough experience to launch something big. Months went by. I wasn't making any real progress. My savings were running out, and my parents were starting to worry. They thought I was crazy. They didn't understand why I didn't just go back to a stable job. But I was stubborn, maybe too stubborn. Then came the breakthrough, or at least I thought it was one. I met a guy at a bar who was talking about this app he'd been working on for a year. It was a productivity tool aimed at helping small businesses manage their inventory. He had a working prototype, but no idea how to market it. The concept wasn't great, but it was something. He offered me a partnership, and I jumped in headfirst. We didn't have much of a plan or even a proper business structure. I was just excited to be involved in something, anything. The first few months were brutal. We didn't make any sales, and we were constantly fixing bugs. I put all my money into it, and it was starting to feel like I was sinking deeper into debt. Eventually, the partnership fell apart. I was left with nothing but a ton of debt and a shattered ego. I went back to square one, feeling like a total failure. I spent the next year just trying to make ends meet. I was doing freelance marketing work for random clients, but it wasn't anything that was going to make me rich. I was living in a dingy apartment, eating ramen every night, and wondering if I had made the worst decision of my life by leaving a steady job. The idea of going back to corporate life was tempting, but something inside me refused to give up. And then one day, I had an idea. I was talking to a friend who had just opened a local bakery. She was struggling with tracking her sales and inventory manually, and I realized there was a massive gap in the market for simple software tailored to small business owners like her. I couldn't believe it took me this long to realize it, but there it was. I decided to take everything I'd learned from my failures and apply it to this new idea. I started building a small software tool, a simple point-of-sale system that was easy to use for small business owners. I didn't know how to code, So I hired a freelance developer to help me with the tech side of things. We built a basic version of the software and launched it. The first few months were rough. We had no marketing budget, and I didn't have a clue how to sell software. I spent hours emailing business owners, trying to convince them to give our tool a shot. No one was biting. I was back to that feeling of frustration, thinking maybe I was just chasing another pipe dream. But then, one of those emails I sent months earlier paid off. A local shopkeeper got back to me, saying they'd be willing to try the software for a month for free. The first sale. It wasn't much, but it felt like the first real sign that I wasn't completely crazy. From there, things started to gain some momentum. I started getting more feedback from customers, and I used that to improve the product. I was so focused on providing value that I didn't worry much about the competition. I knew I was doing something different, something that was working for small business owners in a way no one else was doing. Word of mouth started working for us, and before long, we had more customers than we could handle. The real breakthrough came when I attended a small tech conference and met a venture capitalist who was interested in the concept. He agreed to invest in our company. That was the game changer. With funding, we could hire more developers, improve the product, and really start growing. Fast forward a couple of years, and we now have hundreds of small business clients and employees working in our office. Our software has evolved into a full suite of tools that help business owners manage everything from sales and inventory to employee scheduling and payroll. Our company is worth several $1 million now, and we're constantly improving. But the journey wasn't easy. I lost friends, money, and time along the way. There were moments where I felt like giving up, where I thought I had hit a dead end. But I kept going, and I think that's the biggest lesson I learned. Success is not about avoiding failure. It's about how you respond to it. The hardest days are the ones that shape you. If you're thinking about starting a business, just know that it's going to suck for a while. You'll feel like quitting, but keep going. That's my story. I hope it helps someone out there. Don't give up. I had always dreamed of being an entrepreneur, but it was something I never truly thought I could achieve. Growing up in a small town where most people worked 9-to-5 jobs and retirement was the goal, the idea of starting a business seemed like a distant fantasy. But after a series of unexpected events and a long journey of self-discovery, I found myself diving headfirst into the chaotic and often overwhelming world of entrepreneurship. It all started when I was in my late 20s, living in a cramped apartment, working as a marketing coordinator for a tech company. I had a decent salary, health benefits, and some semblance of stability, but something felt off. I didn't wake up with passion for what I was doing. It was a job I was good at, but it wasn't my job. It wasn't my dream. I spent a lot of time thinking about what I truly wanted in life, and it always came back to one thing. I wanted to build something of my own. The idea for my business came to me one rainy afternoon when I was walking home from work. I passed by a coffee shop that had a quirky, vintage feel, with mismatched furniture and handwritten signs that made it feel like the kind of place where you'd want to spend hours. I thought, why doesn't my town have a place like this? There were a few coffee shops, sure, but nothing with that unique, cozy vibe that made you want to stay. So I started imagining what it would take to create such a space. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started jotting down ideas in a notebook, sketching potential layouts for the interior, and brainstorming what my dream coffee shop would look like. It wasn't just a coffee shop, it was a place for people to gather, a place to relax and enjoy not only coffee but also community. I wanted to make it more than just a transaction. I wanted people to feel like they belonged when they stepped through the door. At first, I laughed at myself. I had no experience in the food or beverage industry, let alone in managing a business. But the more I thought about it, the more excited I became. It wasn't just about selling coffee, it was about creating an experience, a space where people could forget about the hustle and bustle of life for a while. The idea started to feel less like a fantasy and more like a real possibility. I began doing research. I spent countless hours reading about the coffee industry, looking at potential competitors, and analyzing what made certain coffee shops stand out. I also learned about the nuts and bolts of starting a business, licenses, permits, equipment, marketing strategies, and the financial side of things. It was overwhelming, but I was determined. I talked to anyone I could who had been involved in opening a small business, restaurant owners, coffee shop baristas, real estate agents, and I listened. Every conversation gave me more insight into what I needed to do. By the time I was ready to take the plunge, I had saved up enough money to put down a deposit on a small storefront in a location that seemed ideal. It was in a bustling part of town, just a few blocks from a college campus. There was a steady stream of foot traffic, and the space was affordable, even if it was a bit outdated. I remember the day I signed the lease. It felt surreal, like everything I had been dreaming about was suddenly becoming real. But then, reality hit. I had to renovate the space, buy all the equipment, hire staff, and market the business. I was scared, terrified, even. What if I failed? What if I had made a huge mistake? My savings were tied up in this, and I didn't have a backup plan. I started with the basics, fixing up the space. I wanted it to feel warm and inviting, a little eclectic, but not too overwhelming. I worked with a local carpenter to build custom shelving and tables. I found second-hand furniture from thrift stores and flea markets to give the shop character. I painted the walls a soft, earthy color and hung up art from local artists. Every little detail mattered. I wanted people to feel like they were stepping into a place that was curated just for them. Then, there was the menu. I didn't want it to be just your typical coffee shop fare. Yes, there would be espresso, lattes, and drip coffee, but I wanted something different, something that would make my shop stand out. I spent weeks experimenting with different recipes, testing out unique flavors, and finding local suppliers who could provide high-quality ingredients. I decided to feature a rotating selection of seasonal drinks, like pumpkin spice lattes in the fall and iced matcha lattes in the summer, along with some vegan and gluten-free options. I also added a small selection of pastries from a local bakery, which helped support another small business in town. Finally, I had to hire staff. I was nervous about finding people who shared my vision, who would be just as passionate about creating a welcoming environment as I was. I posted ads online, interviewed dozens of candidates, and eventually put together a team that felt like family. They weren't just baristas, they were my partners in creating the experience I envisioned. The day we opened, I was a nervous wreck. I had spent so much time preparing for this moment that it felt surreal. The first few hours were a blur, with customers trickling in, ordering drinks, and finding seats. I watched from behind the counter as they took their first sips, and I could see it on their faces. They liked it. They really liked it. People started posting photos on social media, tagging us in their posts, and word began to spread. The next few months were a whirlwind. Some days were slow, and I doubted myself. But on the busy days, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I was building something. The business grew slowly at first, but word of mouth spread. People began to come back, not just for the coffee, but for the community we had created. They started to get to know our names, and we got to know theirs. Regulars became friends, and new faces became familiar. We hosted open mic nights, book clubs, and local events to further bring people together. Looking back now, I realize how much I've learned. Starting a business was harder than I ever imagined, but it's also been the most rewarding experience of my life. There were days when I thought I couldn't keep going, but then I would see someone smiling over a cup of coffee or hear a customer say they loved the vibe of the shop, and all that doubt would disappear. It's been 5 years since I opened my coffee shop, and it's still growing. We've expanded the menu, added a few more locations, and continue to be a place where people come together. There are still challenges, of course, but I've learned how to navigate them. The most important lesson I've learned is that entrepreneurship isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to take risks, adapt, and, above all, persevere. I never thought I could be an entrepreneur, but now I can't imagine my life any other way. My journey into entrepreneurship wasn't something I had planned. It wasn't some grand vision of changing the world or a childhood dream of owning a successful business. It was simply a matter of survival and persistence. If anything, my story is about the messy, uncertain path to success that many entrepreneurs don't talk about enough. I grew up in a modest household in a small town. My parents were hardworking, but money was always tight. I didn't have much growing up, but I also didn't lack for anything essential. I was the kid who sold candy at school, not because I wanted to make a profit, but because I wanted a little extra pocket change for movies, games, and the occasional treat. As I got older, I started getting into the idea of business more seriously. The idea of starting something of my own became a constant thought, though it wasn't clear what exactly that would look like. After high school, I went to college, but to be honest, I wasn't really invested in my studies. I spent most of my time bouncing between majors, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. At 19, I dropped out. I didn't have a clear idea of what I was doing, but I knew that sitting in a classroom wasn't going to get me where I wanted to be. I wanted to build something, but I had no idea what that something was. I found work as a waiter and started saving up a little money here and there. I'd go home after work and read articles about successful entrepreneurs, watched their interviews on YouTube, and began consuming anything that gave me some insight into the business world. I came across the idea of starting a service-based business and decided to try my hand at it. The first venture was cleaning services. It seemed simple enough. I figured people needed help cleaning their homes, and I could hire a small team to handle the workload. I wasn't exactly passionate about cleaning, but I thought, hey, it's a business, and businesses make money, right? I borrowed a little cash from family and started by advertising on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. For the first few months, business was slow. I had a few clients, but it wasn't enough to scale. I had trouble finding reliable employees, and frankly, I didn't have the management skills needed to keep things organized. I made every mistake you can imagine. I underestimated how much capital I needed to operate. I didn't charge enough to cover expenses. I didn't know how to market properly. I also didn't have the patience to handle the ups and downs that come with running a business. The cleaning service failed after about a year. I lost most of the money I'd invested and ended up back at square one, working in a restaurant again to make ends meet. But I didn't give up. I had learned a lot during that time, even if it didn't feel like it. What I learned was that I had to focus on something I was genuinely passionate about. I realized that I wasn't cut out for the cleaning industry, but I had a passion for technology and digital marketing. I had spent hours watching tutorials, reading blogs, and learning SEO, Facebook ads, and Google Analytics. I saw a huge opportunity in digital marketing for small businesses, and I knew that this time I had to do it differently. So, I took a leap of faith and started a small digital marketing agency. My first step was to take all the money I had saved up and invest in a website and branding. I reached out to small businesses in my area and offered free consultations. My pitch was simple. I can help you get more customers by improving your online presence. A few local restaurants and retail stores took me up on the offer, and I started working late nights to craft better websites, optimize their social media presence, and run ads to drive traffic. It wasn't easy, but the results started speaking for themselves. A local coffee shop saw a 30% increase in customers after I revamped their social media strategy. A family-owned bakery doubled its foot traffic after I set up a Google Ads campaign targeting people nearby. The word started spreading, and I gained more clients, which meant I could hire a few more people to help with the workload. But even as my agency started to grow, it wasn't without its challenges. I was still learning on the fly, making mistakes, and facing setbacks. One of the biggest hurdles was handling cash flow. For the first couple of years, I was constantly running out of money because I was reinvesting every dollar into the business. I also had trouble trusting employees at first. I was so used to doing everything myself that I struggled to delegate tasks. But the more I hired, the more I realized that I needed a team to scale, and I needed to let go of my need for control. Eventually, I hired a few solid account managers who helped streamline the client onboarding process and customer service. I also invested in better software for project management and client communication, which helped keep everyone organized. Things were starting to look up, but just when I thought I was getting the hang of it, the pandemic hit. The initial months of the pandemic were terrifying. Businesses were shutting down, and many of my clients couldn't afford to pay their bills. I had to make the tough decision to let go of a few employees and reduce my own salary to keep the business afloat. It felt like I had worked so hard to get to this point, and now everything was at risk. But I didn't give up. I pivoted my business model, focusing more on remote work solutions for companies who were struggling with digital transitions. I started offering services like website redesigns, e-commerce setups, and virtual event marketing. Slowly but surely, things began to pick up again. It wasn't easy, but it was during that period of hardship that I learned the true value of resilience. I had to pivot, adapt, and face every challenge head-on. The pandemic gave me the space to think outside the box and find new opportunities within my niche. As a result, my business grew even more than before. We landed some high-profile clients, expanded our team, and started offering consulting services in addition to our digital marketing offerings. Now, 5 years after I took that leap of faith, I've built a thriving agency. We've expanded into multiple markets, hired a team of 30 people, and consistently rank as one of the top marketing firms in our area. It's been a wild ride, and there are still challenges every day, but I'm proud of what I've built. I've learned so much along the way, from managing a team to scaling a business to handling financial setbacks. Entrepreneurship is messy, it's exhausting, and it's not for the faint of heart. but it's also one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. Looking back, I never could have imagined where this journey would take me. I started with nothing more than an idea and a willingness to work hard. And now, I get to wake up every day and do what I love while helping others grow their businesses. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that success doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of persistence, learning from mistakes, and never giving up, even when things look impossible. I had always been the kid who loved fixing things. Growing up in a small town, I didn't have many toys, but I had an old bike I got for my birthday when I was about 7. It was a hand-me-down from my cousin, and it was falling apart. But I wasn't disappointed. To me, it was a project. I spent hours tinkering with the gears, wheels, and even painted it with some leftover cans of paint from my mom's garage. I was the weird kid who enjoyed fixing things more than using them, and that passion slowly grew into something bigger. After high school, I moved to the city to attend college. I didn't know what I wanted to study, but I knew that I couldn't just sit through lectures and absorb information that didn't resonate with me. I needed something practical. After a couple of semesters, I dropped out. My family was furious. My parents had worked hard to get me into college, and now I was throwing it all away. But deep down, I knew that my hands were meant for something else, something that wasn't taught in a lecture hall. I moved into a tiny apartment and started doing odd jobs. I helped friends fix their computers, mowed lawns for neighbors, and worked part-time at a local bicycle shop. That was when the idea first hit me. The bicycle shop was small, and they barely had enough business to keep the lights on, but I loved the work. One day, the owner, Jim, had a heart-to-heart with me after I stayed late to help fix a broken-down delivery truck. He said, "You know, son, if you want to own a business, you need more than just a passion for what you do. You need to know how to run it." I didn't fully grasp what he meant at that time, but I began to reflect on it. I realized that Jim's bike shop was failing because he wasn't focusing on growth. He did what he loved, fixing bikes, but he wasn't focusing on marketing, managing inventory, or adapting to new trends. He was stuck in a rut, and I didn't want to make the same mistake. I took what little money I had saved up and decided to invest in myself. I enrolled in an online business course to understand the fundamentals of entrepreneurship. It wasn't easy. The course was full of jargon and technical details that made my head spin, but I pushed through. I remember the moment it clicked for me. One of the lessons explained the difference between a hobby and a business. A hobby is something you enjoy, but a business is something you do for profit. If you want to succeed as an entrepreneur, you need to treat it as a business, not just a passion project. I knew what I had to do. I'd start my own business. I wasn't going to open a bike shop. I had learned enough from Jim's failure to understand that wasn't the right route. Instead, I would build a company that focused on custom-built bicycles, tailored specifically to individual needs. People were becoming more health-conscious and environmentally aware, and cycling was experiencing a resurgence. But the market wasn't saturated with personalized, high-quality bikes. With a clear vision in mind, I gathered my savings, borrowed a bit of money from my family after a long, awkward conversation, and launched a small website called Tailored Wheels. The concept was simple. Customers could input their specifications, height, weight, riding style, even preferred colors, and I'd build a bike just for them. For the first few months, it was tough. I had no real marketing experience, and I didn't have a big budget. I spent sleepless nights building my website, designing a few bikes, and testing different models. I reached out to influencers and cycling enthusiasts on social media, offering them free bikes in exchange for reviews. Slowly but surely, word of mouth started to spread. But the turning point came when I partnered with a local cycling event in the city. I set up a booth at the event, showcasing my custom-built bikes. The first few people who came by were skeptical. "What makes your bikes different from what's already out there?" they asked. I explained the concept of personalized bikes, the level of care that went into each design, and how every component was handpicked for quality. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. By the end of that weekend, I had sold over a dozen bikes. It wasn't a huge number, but it was enough to confirm that I was onto something. I used the revenue to reinvest in the business. I hired a small team of talented mechanics, improved my website, and even started running paid ads on social media. The business began to grow. By the end of my first year, I had expanded into a full-scale workshop with a few employees. We were building custom bikes for clients all over the country, and I was even shipping bikes internationally. I started reinvesting every penny back into the company to improve our designs, buy better materials, and hire more skilled workers. The feedback from customers was overwhelmingly positive, and that kept me going. But growth brings its own challenges. As the business expanded, so did the complexities. I had to learn how to manage inventory, negotiate with suppliers, and hire a team of customer service representatives to handle the growing volume of orders. There were months when I was barely scraping by, paying off debts, and managing cash flow. There were also times when I thought about quitting, especially when I received negative reviews or when a product didn't meet my standards. But I had learned the most valuable lesson from my time working at Jim's bike shop: you have to keep pushing forward. There were times when it felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders, but I reminded myself why I started in the first place. I wasn't just building bikes, I was building something that mattered. Eventually, things started to stabilize. I expanded into other product lines, such as accessories and apparel, and developed a loyal customer base. In my third year, I took the bold step of opening a storefront. It was a huge risk, but it paid off. People loved coming in, seeing the bikes, and learning more about the customization process. The next few years were a blur. We grew rapidly, eventually becoming one of the top custom bike brands in the country. I learned to balance the operational aspects with the creative side, which was always my passion. I never stopped thinking about how I could make our bikes even better, how I could offer more personalized services, or how we could impact the cycling community in a positive way. Today, I sit in my office, looking at a wall of awards and plaques from different cycling organizations and business groups. I still remember those early days when I had no idea how I was going to make it, but I believed in myself, and I stuck with it. It hasn't been easy, and there are still days when I feel overwhelmed, but I wouldn't change a thing. If I've learned anything from my journey, it's this: never underestimate the power of persistence. If you have a vision, and you're willing to learn, adapt, and fail a few times along the way, you can turn your passion into a successful business. I was fresh out of college, 23 years old, living in a small apartment with a couple of roommates, and holding a job I didn't particularly love at a small marketing firm. The corporate world was not my thing. I'd spent my entire childhood dreaming of entrepreneurship, imagining myself building a company from the ground up, making my mark. But there I was, waking up every morning at 6 a.m., dressing in business casual, and heading to a job where I didn't see much of a future. Then, one day, I got an email from a friend I'd met during my summer internship. He'd started his own business, an e-commerce company that sold custom-designed phone cases, and it was doing well. I remember being jealous at first. How could he make that leap? Was it luck, or did he have something I didn't? That was the start of a new chapter for me. He'd grown his business with very little capital, doing it all by himself. He talked about how he learned everything by watching YouTube videos, reading forums, and experimenting until he got it right. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I'd spent enough time feeling stuck, watching others chase their dreams while I was stuck in a cubicle. I stayed up late that night researching everything I could about e-commerce and entrepreneurship. I wanted to learn how to build a business without investing my savings in a physical store or taking on massive debt. That's when I came across dropshipping. For those who don't know, dropshipping is a business model where you sell products to customers without ever actually handling or storing inventory. The idea intrigued me immediately. No inventory, no upfront costs. It sounded almost too good to be true, but I didn't want to let that stop me. I started small. I found a platform called Shopify, and after a week of reading blogs and watching tutorial videos, I had built my first online store. It was nothing fancy, just a simple e-commerce site selling custom t-shirts. I figured it was a low-risk way to test my skills without investing too much money. I spent hours designing logos, writing product descriptions, and even shooting photos of t-shirts in my living room. I could already see the vision in my head: a successful store that would let me quit my job and work for myself. But there was a huge problem. No one was buying anything. I remember the first week of launching the store. I was checking the website every hour, hoping to see a sale come through. Nothing. Not a single order. I started feeling like a failure. Maybe I had misunderstood the entire business model. Maybe this wasn't for me. I went back to researching and realized my biggest mistake. I hadn't done enough to drive traffic to my store. I thought people would just magically find it. But of course, that's not how it works. So, I decided to dive into marketing, specifically Facebook ads. I spent $50 on an ad campaign targeting people who liked similar products, hoping to get some traction. To my surprise, the next day I had my first sale. I could hardly believe it. One order might not sound like much, but to me, it was proof that I could actually make this work. That was the turning point. I spent the next few months perfecting my ad strategy, testing different audiences, creating more engaging content, and even partnering with influencers to promote my store. Slowly but surely, the sales began to grow. But I was still working full-time at my marketing job, so every moment I wasn't at work, I was managing my store. The late nights became routine. I felt exhausted, but I couldn't stop. There was a hunger inside me that couldn't be satisfied until I had achieved something more than what my job could offer me. One of the hardest things about building my business was managing customer service. For the first few months, I was handling everything myself. I was the one responding to emails, tracking down shipments, and dealing with returns. It took up a lot of my time, and there were days when I felt like I was drowning. I was managing a full-time job while trying to grow my business, but I knew that I had to keep going. I needed to prove to myself that I could make this work. Then came the breakthrough. I decided to hire my first virtual assistant. I had read about outsourcing, and it seemed like the perfect solution. I couldn't afford to hire someone full-time, but I could afford to pay for a few hours of help each week. I found a VA from the Philippines through a freelancer platform, and it changed everything. She helped with customer service, responding to emails, and handling order processing. Suddenly, I had more time to focus on growing my business instead of getting stuck in the minutiae. With the extra time, I began focusing on scaling. I started adding more products to my store, creating better ad campaigns, and refining my email marketing strategy. I began outsourcing more tasks and reinvesting the profits back into the business. Slowly, the orders increased, and my store started making more money than I was making at my full-time job. It was still a side hustle, but I could see the potential. Then came the day when I realized I had outgrown my job. I'd reached a point where the income from my store was consistently higher than my salary. I remember sitting at my desk at work, looking out the window, and feeling a wave of excitement. I had enough saved up to take the leap. I knew that if I didn't quit my job soon, I would never take the business seriously. So, I handed in my resignation and went full-time with my store. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. There were days when sales were slow, and I worried I'd made the wrong decision. But I stuck to my plan, continued scaling, and kept learning. I started to hire more people to help with customer service, marketing, and even product design. Over time, my store grew into something bigger than I had ever imagined. I was able to build a small team, and I was living the dream I'd had since I was a kid. It's been 5 years now since I left my job, and my business has changed my life. I'm not a millionaire yet, but I've created something that gives me freedom and flexibility. I've learned more than I ever could have imagined, and I've failed countless times, but each failure has been a lesson. Looking back, I can't help but laugh at how terrified I was in the beginning. The idea of starting a business seemed so daunting, but now, I can't imagine doing anything else. Starting a business isn't easy. It requires hard work, persistence, and a willingness to fail and learn from those failures. But if you have the drive and the passion, anything is possible. I'm living proof of that. It's crazy to think that it all started with a simple email from a friend. A reminder that sometimes, the best thing you can do is take that first step, even when you're not sure where it will lead. The road ahead is always uncertain, but it's up to you to keep moving forward. I remember the exact moment everything changed for me. It was the evening of a chilly fall night in 2016. I had been running my small online store for about 2 years by that point. The business was growing, but at a pace that felt like crawling through mud. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't seem to get the right product mix, the best pricing strategy, or an efficient way of driving traffic to my website. I was sitting in my small apartment, a space I had shared with 2 roommates to save money. My computer screen was glowing in front of me, and I was staring at a product analytics dashboard. The numbers weren't pretty. My sales had stagnated, and it felt like I was doing everything wrong. I had tried Facebook ads, influencer partnerships, and even a bit of SEO, but nothing seemed to make a dent. My biggest regret at the time? Not seeking help sooner. I thought I could figure everything out myself, which, as I learned later, was a rookie mistake. But that night, as I stared at the screen, I decided to make a change. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't keep going the way I had been. I closed my laptop and stood up, pacing around my apartment. I needed to change my mindset first before I could change my business. I had always been told that persistence and hard work would pay off, and I was determined to make that true. But the harder I worked, the more I realized that working harder wasn't enough. I needed to work smarter. That's when I started researching mentorship. I'd heard of successful entrepreneurs who attributed their success to having a mentor, and I thought it sounded like the kind of thing I could use. I started looking into finding someone in my niche to guide me, someone who had already done what I was trying to do. After sending out a bunch of emails, I finally got a response. It was a guy named David, who had been in the e-commerce space for over 10 years. He'd grown a business from scratch into a multi-million-dollar company and sold it off. He was honest with me from the start. I don't have time to teach you everything, but I can show you the framework. What you do with it is up to you. Those words hit me like a ton of bricks, but in a good way. David wasn't going to hold my hand. He wasn't going to spoon-feed me success. If I wanted it, I had to put in the work. We started our first session together with a breakdown of what I was currently doing with my store. David asked all the right questions. He asked about my target market, my pricing strategy, my product offerings, and the sources of traffic to my site. I remember being defensive at first, thinking he didn't get it. But the more I listened, the more I realized I was missing fundamental pieces. I had no clear vision. My products weren't tailored to a specific audience, and my marketing efforts were all over the place. I wasn't creating a community around my brand. I wasn't even tracking my customer data properly to improve my offerings. Everything was scattershot, and David quickly pointed that out. We spent weeks digging into the data, refining my customer personas, and rethinking my website layout and copy. I learned more in those weeks than I had in the entire 2 years running my store. But the most important takeaway from all of that was realizing that my store needed a unique voice. It needed to stand for something. At that moment, I realized the market was saturated with similar businesses offering the same things. I wasn't going to stand out unless I did something different. One of the things David taught me was the importance of product differentiation. Instead of trying to sell everything to everyone, I needed to focus on one specific market segment. That's when I decided to narrow down my offerings to a single, niche product. This decision wasn't easy, but it felt right. I chose to focus on sustainable, eco-friendly products, something I was deeply passionate about. After the pivot, the growth didn't come overnight. There were still plenty of sleepless nights, testing new ad campaigns, trying different messaging strategies, and tweaking the product itself. But slowly, the numbers started to improve. My sales started to climb at a steady rate, and I could feel the momentum building. In the following months, I learned to build a community around my brand. I started offering free educational content on sustainability, sharing tips on reducing waste, and collaborating with other eco-conscious influencers. I didn't just want to sell a product. I wanted to create a movement. But even though things were finally going well, I ran into another challenge: scalability. With success came growing pains. The demand for my product grew so quickly that I couldn't keep up with it all. I was spending my days packing orders, answering emails, and trying to handle customer service, all while juggling marketing and social media. It was exhausting. That's when I had to make another tough decision. I needed help, and I needed to learn how to delegate. This was the point where I really had to shift my mindset. I couldn't do everything myself anymore. I hired my first employee, a logistics manager, to help with the growing orders. That move was a game changer. It freed me up to focus on strategy and vision, rather than being bogged down by the day-to-day operations. After the hire, we moved into a small office space and began expanding the team. We focused on creating a seamless experience for customers. Everything from shipping times to the unboxing experience was carefully thought through. We wanted our customers to feel like they were part of something bigger, like they were making a positive impact by supporting a sustainable brand. It wasn't just about making sales anymore. It was about building a legacy. That mindset shift was the turning point. We went from a small e-commerce store to a full-fledged business. By 2019, we were a 7-figure company, and I finally felt like I had achieved what I'd set out to do. I had built something meaningful. Now, looking back, I realized that the turning point came when I chose to get out of my own way. I stopped pretending that I had all the answers and found someone who had already been where I wanted to go. I learned that entrepreneurship wasn't just about working harder. It was about working smarter, building relationships, and being open to change. If I had to sum up everything I've learned, it would be this: success isn't just about the product you sell or the marketing strategy you use. It's about the people you surround yourself with and the willingness to keep evolving, even when things aren't going your way. Success is never linear, and the best entrepreneurs are the ones who are always learning and adapting. If you're reading this and you're stuck in your own journey, remember this. You don't have to figure it all out on your own. Seek help, focus on your customers, and above all, stay true to your vision. Because if you keep working towards it, you'll eventually break through. That's my story. From a small, struggling e-commerce store to a thriving, meaningful business. It wasn't easy, but every challenge was worth it. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.